Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining this 14th edition of the KM Global Network research community. It's glad to see all these familiar faces again. So let me, before I introduce our speaker today, let me again share some of the news about this community and share a bit who we are for those of you who are new to this group. And I will do it very quickly. Okay, so hopefully you can see my slides. So on the Windows. Okay, great. So that's the 14th meeting of this KMGN research community. Moria is currently traveling to KM World in Washington, D.C., so she could not join us today, but she passed her regards to everyone. So once again, this KMGN research community is really a very informal community where we try 4 times a year to invite speakers who share with us some of the work they have done in the field of KM, or some of the research that they have that is ongoing, or some of the sometimes published papers that they have recently published and present to us in a more interactive way. So we are really open to any kind of discussions around some hot topic or some future topic about KM and its future. So we have also a WhatsApp group that you can join in scanning this QR code. Otherwise, I will share it through the chat later on if some of you are not members yet and would like to join this WhatsApp group. Now, so we had a large number of speakers in the past, like I said, coming from different backgrounds, academic practitioners, and from different parts of the world. All these recordings are available on our YouTube channel, so you can go to YouTube, you look for KMGN Research Community, and you can watch our past events. So when it comes to next year, we have identified already some potential speakers, but we are still open to more speakers. So if some of you are interested in sharing something with the community, feel free to send me an email, and we would be happy to have you also as part of our next year speakers. So in the upcoming months, we will announce the 4 speakers for next year, and so you can already pencil them in your agenda. Great. So today we are very honored to have Dr. Bebeka Cosandey to be with us. She's a very busy KM professional and researcher professional, so we are very thankful that she accepted this invitation. Dr. Bebeka is wearing many hats, so I think I will let her introduce herself. I think she would better be able to tell you a bit about all the things she has been doing or she's doing with all of us. So, Dr. Bebeka, I will stop sharing my screen. I will give you the screen, and once again, I mean, I'm sure you will.
Thank you for the
introduction.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Okay, please go ahead.
Yes. So hi everyone, I'm Bebeka Cosandey, and today I'm honored to be part of this group and this community. I was telling Vincent earlier, I would like to make this as interactive as possible. I would like it to be sort of a discussion and less of just a presentation. Obviously, we can also connect later on. Here is my LinkedIn. And in my last slides, I also have like all my phone number, emails, and so on. But LinkedIn usually works best for me because I could put a face also to everybody that I connect with. So I'm a scientist, biologist, biology engineer, I would say. I'm originally American, but I'm Swiss American, and I'll start with the latest, the latest education. I did my PhD in health science and technology at the University of, at the ETH Zurich, which is, for a technical school for a lot of engineering and science backgrounds, let's say the equivalent of MIT in Europe. For some of you that maybe, I mean, as an American, I'm always surprised how many Americans, they don't know a lot of other schools outside the US, that maybe it's not the case here. So after my studies, my dream job was to work for a big pharma company in Switzerland, and that happened right away due to my background. And this is sort of like how I got into knowledge management, because my first job in pharma, it was extremely complicated in terms of transferring projects from one side or from one team to another, from one side to another, and I understood that knowledge management wasn't there. And this is sort of how, a little bit by curiosity, a little bit by laziness, a little bit by innovation, call it what you want, I just tried to make my job easier, more sustainable. So I got into knowledge management to help myself and my teams into actually getting the work done. So what is the knowledge value chain? For me, it goes from data, innovation, knowledge, wisdom, and obviously something that key experts have in any company or organization, tacit knowledge. So for me, knowledge management transforms raw data. And as you can imagine, in healthcare and in pharma, this is big data in terms of quantity and spread into real clinical research insight, and eventually into treatments, right? Into products that can help the patients, which are obviously the main stakeholder in this sectors. In pharma and healthcare, this really is fragmented, and database are shared, but not necessarily the intelligence behind it, how to get things interpreted, and the quality of data is very different from team to team or from site to site. So how to align all of this? Now, I don't have to tell all of you what knowledge is, but in different sectors and in different even companies, sometimes the definition of knowledge is very vague, or we have different understanding of what knowledge is. For me, knowledge is information in action, and it needs to flow. So it needs to be the right knowledge, it gets to the right people at the right time. And knowledge relies on connectivity. And wherever knowledge doesn't stick, for me, that's just information that it's not relevant, and either it becomes tacit and it's not transferred, or is just explicit and very rarely findable. So the importance of knowledge management at different levels. I'm somebody that really likes to see the big pictures, and maybe because most of the positions or the sectors that I covered are in this area. And specifically knowledge management in pharmaceutical sector, we have specific guidelines such as the guideline 8 to 10 and different ISOs for quality by design. So this is actually required, which is at a very high level from a healthcare, from regulators, so FDA, EMA, and so on. And this has been there for a long time. It's just that the granularity it's missing, and this leaves room for interpretation that it's not necessarily understood or interpreted the same way by different people. So for me, there are two levels of knowledge management and knowledge management frameworks. Above the flow and in the flow. So what I mean by this, here it says wiki because I prepared this slide also for internal use because it was one of the tools or frameworks I had created for a certain organization. But you can apply this to anything. So above the flow, outside of the daily workflow, or in the flow using during your daily workflow. So obviously this can be seen two ways. It can be seen by the teams. It can be seen by who is using and who needs this information. But here in the visual representation, you can see the amount of tacit knowledge, which it's really immense in the sectors that I'm covering today, such as healthcare and pharma, just for the specific reason that everybody is an expert of something. So let's say you are an immunologist, or if you are a microbiologist, you know, the level of tacit knowledge is huge. And to get that into a quality manual or SOP, or it's very difficult, you know, to transfer that knowledge and to be read and understood by somebody that doesn't have the same tacit knowledge or background than you. So that's why this sort of ground rule of above the flow and in the flow, it's actually needed, and the share of knowledge has to be constant, otherwise it doesn't work. So these were constant pain points in pharma and healthcare, and I'm sure many of you will find it also relevant in your own sectors. So data silos across departments and organizations, what I was mentioning earlier, one of the main reasons why I got into knowledge management per se. The loss of tacit knowledge, especially in big multinationals. This happens constantly with mergers and staff turnover, but also in the past, I would say 5 to 10 years, it's also due to the boomers or the retirement of a huge generational section of the society, which is retiring or has retired, and the loss of the tacit knowledge is irreplaceable. Compliance focus, overshadowing innovation, and repeated work. So reinventing the wheel, similar but never identical, but still a lot of resources and capacity are used with not much difference, let's say, or not much deliverables and outcome. I'll stop a moment. Anybody has any questions or has a comment? Because it's extremely
Quiet.
quiet.
Okay. You mentioned about certification. You mentioned about ISO 30401. Are you currently certified, or are you looking to be compliant with this standard, or is it what's your
Me
status
personally,
on this?
no. Usually the projects are.
Okay.
So usually the projects or the companies, the organizations are depending on the needs. But yeah, there are guidelines specifically for different projects, such as I mentioned in the previous slide. I guess when you saw this quality by design, it's practically you do not have to repeat. I'm just sort of paraphrasing and simplifying the concept. It's that you don't have to show how your process works from A to Z. If it worked for a previous product and then you sort of transfer that knowledge in a newer product, you can just by design prove to the health regulators that your process works. This is a very simplistic way of putting it.
Okay. Any other question from the audience at this stage? Feel free to take the microphone. No, not yet. So
yes,
you may.
I would have a question. Gabriele speaking. Bebeka, what do you mean by wisdom?
So wisdom, I call it wisdom, sort of like the tacit knowledge, because for me, especially into science and medicine and healthcare, this is very dimensional, like multidimensional. There is the practical side, there is the training of decades of training that cannot be transferred to somebody like just through explicit knowledge or a report or anything that can be written down. So yeah, I guess you saw the figure that's what you are referring to, right?
Yeah, yeah. But thank you for your answer. That explains it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll continue and then please interrupt me anytime. So here I'm getting into a little bit more of details what Vincent was mentioning earlier. There are ICH guidelines which are specific again for the pharma sector, and ICH Q10. Yeah, maybe some of you after this would like to go in there. They have been developed by regulators to actually give some sort of guidance. But again, as I mentioned earlier, the granularity of it and the interpretation, it's very freely interpreted by different organizations, let's say. And I've lived and I've experienced that firsthand in different positions and organizations that I've been working with. So the Q10 defines KM as a systemic approach to acquiring, analyzing, storing, and sharing product and process knowledge across the life cycle. So I don't have to tell you that, if you are working on a biologics or medication or healthcare, like a clinical trial, interpreting what it means acquiring, analyzing, storing, and sharing product and process knowledge across her life cycle. It's extremely different. First of all, the life cycle is different. The acquiring, analyzing, storage is done completely differently. But even with pharma being one of the most, or the top 3 most regulated sectors in the world, there is still a lot of discrepancies in here. ICHQ9, it's quality of risk management. So KM supports risk-based decision and continuous improvement. So this goes hand in hand with what I mentioned earlier about quality by design as well. Continuous improvement, you add something to the current process. You do not try to reinvent and work in silo and create something completely new. So if all of us could do that in a sustainable manner, I think all of us, at least in this meeting, would be extremely happy. And then the 2 ISOs, which I work honestly a little bit less with because this is mostly into production rather than production packaging and all of that, which is sort of not my day-to-day work or not my bread and butter. But I think it was important to mention this, that this actually exists in the pharma and healthcare systems, sets global requirement for establishing and maintaining effective KM systems. Again, very generic, very wide, leaves a lot of room for interpretation, And again, these are much longer than that. I sort of like just wrote one sentence of what will actually record the text. Sometimes it's also hard to digest, I feel, from different teams. I've had communities of practice within different pharmaceutical companies that will sit and how would you interpret this text? How do you understand it actually? And I think, yeah, it can leave quite a little bit of room for interpretation. The other ISO 9001 quality management system, this clause specifically 716 requires organization to identify, maintain, and share knowledge essential to the performance. Also, this for me is something that we all strive to do. Like, first of all, understand where the critical knowledge is within an organization or a team or a project and try to get it out of the tacit phase into some sort of explicit, so that if that knowledge holder, I would call it, or that group of people, for whatever reasons, it's not in the organization anymore, this knowledge can be transferred. So I will be sharing with you different, this is a little bit like what I picked and chose from different projects and different activities that I've done throughout the 10 years that I've been doing different knowledge management activities within pharma and clinical trials and healthcare practically. One that was the most time consuming and exciting, I would say, it was a while back when I was still very motivated, and I think also a little bit naive, you know, that the whole knowledge management framework that I would be creating will be actually implemented company-wise, organization-wise. And at the time, it was more than 200,000 people. It did work, but it did not work at the whole company level, let's say. It was mostly a unit implementation, which was about 200 people. So at the time, I was working at the analytics team and technical development, so of a pharma company, multinational pharma company. I don't want to mention them, but it's not hard to imagine which one in Switzerland, so one of those. And then I was working, as I said, as a global project manager. So it would require a lot of transferring of data and results, and also phases of a project being transferred, let's say, from Fort Worth, Texas to Switzerland, to Slovenia, to Singapore, and so on. And I realized that a lot of us were working in different templates, different protocol, different SOP processes, you name it. So I conducted more than 100 interviews with different stakeholders at different levels, and from different sections of the unit. So just to understand what was how did they understand knowledge management practically. And let me tell you, at the time, a lot of them relied on very basic personal interaction. So to make this a little bit more visual for this meeting, I like this word clouds when they actually mentioned what they were using for their inflow and out of flow, what I mentioned earlier. And then here, as you can see, it was before ChatGPT. So if you see Google would be the equivalent of ChatGPT today, because I hear that this is the new Google. But anyway, so I'm pretty sure that a lot of us are not surprised to see that personal interaction, SharePoint, and I'll specify Teddy. It was our documentation system at the time. So it's like an internal SOP documentation system of the organization. This can be called different things in different or different tools within different organization, but it's just practically documentation system. And then here it's the knowledge management resources and their accessibility. And again, you would see that personal interaction took a majority, or was one of the major answers that I got. The thing about it, although at the time, and this is how I mentioned I got into knowledge management, is that if you are a newcomer in the company of more than 200,000 people, of course, not all of them are on site, it's across the world and so on. And then everybody, it's usually very busy, very overworked, and they have their own routine. Getting into those personal interactions to actually stop them and ask questions all the time, I don't think that it's feasible. It works fine for people that have been within the company for 30 plus years, or even less sometimes, obviously, but of course, it makes sense to know who owns that information, who has the data. Getting to the source directly saves you a lot of time and effort. And I think this is something that is common and very repeatable from organization, from sector to sector. I don't think it's specific to pharma. Okay. Oh, I think I went. Yeah. Again, here it was a sort of repetition of the same thing. So if you saw all of the questions, they sort of all rely on personal interaction, SharePoint, the documentation system that I mentioned earlier, and a little bit of everything else. And then when asked this 100 plus interviewees, if they thought that knowledge management, it was important for the success of their organization, well, not all of them decided to answer that question, because again, not necessarily everybody had the same understanding of what knowledge management was. So based on that, some of the participants were sort of excluded from the results, but we all agree, or most of them agree, that it's strongly, it's important. And then also at the time, what we call here wiki pages is a knowledge management framework practically, and concept to manage as a way to manage all these gaps in knowledge management. So finding a way to link the SharePoint, the Teddy, the Google, the personal interactions, and get them into a solution. So what this framework consisted of at the time, it was expert locator to actually, I unfortunately, due to, I cannot show you that anymore because I would have to get permission from the company, and I don't think that's feasible at the time since I don't work for them anymore. But the tool consists mostly of expert locator, and that will be the next step into creating that personal interaction that not everybody had, especially as a newcomer and while you are onboarding. And then the next one would be also deciding, or the managers would have to find out where the critical knowledge is. So from tacit, it became some sort of implicit and explicit before, hopefully before the knowledge or the talent left the company for one reason or the other. So some of the major learnings out of this 100 plus interviews were knowledge management important, obviously. I mean, we can all agree on that. That was groundbreaking. Then the knowledge sharing culture is a must. Obviously, any knowledge management manager here knows that how people interact between each other, it's key. However, you cannot change the culture of the company through knowledge management, or create a knowledge management framework to replace the culture. So hopefully this goes hand in hand, as well as alignment, harmonization. It's crucial. This worked very well for the team that I was leading at the time. And as I said, this knowledge management framework was implemented within with more than 200 employees in 13 different sites. Communication and flow of knowledge, it's imminent. And then this is always a little bit easier when you start off, and then it sort of dies out. So the key to this is maintenance and governance. You would need obviously resources and capacity and people to actually be dedicated solely to that. And I don't have to tell you that this is where it gets tricky, let's say.
Just a quick question, Bebeka.
Of course.
Yeah, so you mentioned early on that there was also a risk dimension, risk mitigation dimension associated with knowledge management. So did your respondent also realize that there was potentially a risk also of not properly managing knowledge, not being just a nice things to have, but having also potentially it could
Yes.
create some issues? Was it also part of the discussion?
It was. So, I mean, this was something that went on for several years. I was trying to recapitulate here. Oftentimes, the ROI, it was, you could actually put also a value, a monetary value on like not losing that knowledge or at least an estimation of that. And that was usually what I would present sponsors to actually. So at some levels, at some high levels, there was an understanding of that. At the ground floors, that's not necessarily something that you think on a daily basis. And honestly, this was really a mix of different levels of employees, let's say, from technicians, research technicians, to high management. And depending on where you were on that scale, that understanding was basic or not to sufficient to highest priority. So I don't know if I answered your question. Depending on
No, you did.
yeah.
Different level, different
Yeah,
awareness.
very different, and honestly, in these companies, a lot of times it's like one of the the major bottleneck that I had was we always done it this way. And that's especially for me at the time, it was the hardest thing to hear, because usually this comes from the people that had the most tacit knowledge and that had been within the organization from the longest, and they weren't the biggest. And looking back, I sort of understand the why, because they had been long enough and they've seen so many tools and so many people coming around and showing something different, and like why they should like jump into this before SharePoint or something else, and then something else and something else. And then every time you would need to readapt to a new tool. And obviously this is very time consuming and tiring after a while, So looking back, I understand that better. Honestly, I didn't understand it at the time, like, why they'll be that resilient,
Okay, good. Is there any other question at this stage from the audience, please?
There is some chat. Did anybody write something? Can you check that, Vincent?
The chat.
Are there questions in the chat?
No.
Okay. All right.
And,
well,
yeah, please.
So what I was referring earlier, this tool that was created by me and some other members of my team was this, what we call CMC Strategy Wiki. This was very specific, but it's a knowledge management framework practically that we wanted to fill the gap between everything else that existed within pharma or the company, the pharmaceutical company that I worked for at the time. And we hope that this was just more accessible to a wider audience in the end. So it went from to fill this gap between tacit knowledge, presentations, to quality manuals, which is the highest, strictest document that you can have, and it has to be approved and reapproved practically. So we wanted it both to be flexible, bottom up, detailed, easy to update, and then also reliable and controlled. Because as a wiki, a lot of people might have, so the idea behind it is that you could update the document or the information or the knowledge for a certain topic, but you would need at least one or two other co-signers, let's say, to approve and update it. Otherwise, it was very risky that the information might have not been reliable. So here are some.
Sorry to interrupt you. We have one question for Torsten who ask, where do you see the difference between wiki And for instance, tool like Confluence.
Exactly. So as I was trying to explain, and this was something that was created specifically for the unit or the department that I was working for. The limitation at the time that I had was that it had to be SharePoint based. So they did not want to get another tool that they would have to train everybody in, which would have required a lot of more training resources, capacity from the daily work of everybody, but also resources to implement the new tool and so on. There are many tools out there now that might have been similar. This was done in-house, let's say.
Okay. And just another question from Monica.
Yeah.
When you identified a piece of critical knowledge that was held by only one expert in the organization, what action did you take, or what strategy or approach did you use for this knowledge to be captured or transferred or amplified and so on?
So within this tool that I'm showing some screenshot of what this included was also a tool that we called it expert locator or critical knowledge locator. So the manager of different teams that would have to fill out for their key, whoever they consider key experts or critical knowledge experts. That's what we called it at the time. They would score it. So it was a scoring board, let's say. And then based on that, if there was only one expert, or usually there is always more than one, otherwise we'll be in trouble. But still, a couple of key experts, that person would be contacted by their supervisor, and then they would have been asked to at least create a template with the critical knowledge that would be needed for a specific process, a specific project. So they will try to get the tacit knowledge of that person into a document practically. So turning tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge. I hope I answered.
And was able to do that easily? Because usually when you ask people who are not used to do such kind of things, I mean, sometimes it's not that they don't want to do it.
This was easy, so I'll just answer that question.
Okay.
Like, I'm selling this, but none of this was easy, and the hardest part is I tried to say in a very Swiss way, like politically correct, was the culture. In many organizations, people do not like to share knowledge because they feel threatened that their position might be jeopardized if they share that knowledge with. Honestly, I've never seen that, from my experience of more than a decade now in the sector. I've never seen anybody sharing knowledge actually being laid off or anything like that. There were many other reasons. Sharing knowledge wasn't one of them, I don't think that especially pharma or healthcare makes decisions based on that. But I might, there will always be the exception that proves the rule, but none of this was easy to share this sort of information. Of course, we tried different incentives, let's say sometimes monetary, sometimes awards. There was also part of their KPI for some people, different ways, but never easy.
And the follow-up question was, how did you identify this expert? Who identifies them based on what criteria?
Yeah, I try to, I'll repeat what I mentioned earlier. So there was a tool that was created, where the critical knowledge was scored by the supervisors of each team. And based on that score, the key knowledge holders, let's say, will be identified. And there were specific meetings, like leadership meetings, when a group of people would decide which one do we contact, like on a rolling basis and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I sort of like stuck to this slide, but what I wanted to show with this, that this is what CMC Strategy Wiki sort of looked like right here. And it had like a home page with interlinkable and search functions that work throughout all the different inflow, let's say, knowledge management and repositories that we were currently using. So not only SharePoints, but also they could search also in PDFs, in documentations, which is critical within the pharma sector as it is extremely regulated. And then this could also discriminate between duplicates, because I wouldn't be able to tell you how many times there were duplicates in this sort of repository over the years. So the effective search function was something that was extremely hard to implement from the IT team that we worked with, but also the maintenance of the search function, because there was always more obviously coming. So this had to be reworked all the time. And then there was also encyclopedic content pages, like giving what does quality by design means, and linking to different forms that we use within the company, what is required, for example, by the health authorities, what I mentioned, the ICH guidelines and so on, and then what trainings, for example, exist within the company if you wanted to get more knowledge in this topic. It could have been slides, but also in-person trainings, which was given from the department or so in a rolling basis. Then the CMC training slide set. This is all I would be very careful to say, but at least a huge majority of slides that were presented either in key meetings that were relevant for different topics, conferences, and so on. There was a way, as you see here, stratified to find maybe what you were looking for. At least this was some sort of explicit knowledge that was being shared throughout the company. Having said that, how many people would have the capacity and time during their workday to go through all of that? That's open for discussion, but at least there was a way to find something if you are looking for something, which, as I mentioned, it was a major gap that I found when I first joined the department. Interface to interactive tools. So this is very specific to pharma, and how you measure the clarity of a product or the efficacy of a product and so on. So this can change over time in different batches and so on. So this needs to be updated on a regular basis, and you would need to check it. Okay, what is it this for this batch? Very specific, but it was able to find it there. And as I said, a lot of these pages would have their author and at least 2, sometimes more co-authors to check and reread the content if it's updated correctly, if it's relevant, and a governance system practically. So to sort of recapitulate what I said so far, the most important thing for me through the years in these sectors were the communities of practice, so the people, the multidisciplinary teams. Without them, it was impossible to create all the framework around it. That was just a tool. Without the knowledge of the people and their collaboration would have been impossible. The processes, knowledge capture, codification, sharing, and then technology, going from semantic data models to more federated systems. What I mean by that is that you do the same wiki page or the same knowledge management framework, was shared throughout all the sites, which had different ways of operating before that. And then what I want to leave you with is some practical takeaways, like if I had to redo it again, I don't think I would start, if I'm very frank with you, considering the time and effort and honest. Just after showing all of this, I don't know what happened to the project once I left. I don't know if somebody else took over. I don't know. I have I would be very doubtful if this was taken over. Also considering that a lot of big pharma and tech companies had major layoffs, so just the capacity wasn't there, I think. I would still want to give this practical takeaways, map your knowledge flow. So if you are able to go to the source of where you can get that knowledge, that's always important. Create communities of practice. This is also as an employee or as a team member, it's also a great way for your network. And once you know some people, you can have structured communities of practice, or still have that personal interactions, which was one of those keywords in the word map that I showed earlier that always pop up. Use semantic metadata frameworks that I showed. Some were created from scratch, but nowadays there are many tools out there that can be implemented within your current framework. Build feedback loops, but not only that, also governance. As I mentioned earlier, it's extremely important. And then measure knowledge use, not just for storage, see how many it's used. So this is something I didn't mention earlier, is that this framework had a huge success, and we would have, in order to keep the interest in the tool, we'll have constant training, constant communications on it. For some people might have gotten even a little bit repetitive or even annoying, but I'm a big believer that repetition is the only way to make knowledge stick. And yeah, and as always, the goal here was to start small and scale it strategically. So for me, it started with a smaller team here in Basel, and then it was implemented within the unit internationally. If I saw much bigger, I thought organization-wide. That didn't happen during the time that I was with the organization, but I think that would have been the best way to implement it in different scales. And then, as I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to me directly and continue this discussion also after this meeting. I would love to connect. This is my LinkedIn, either the QR code here. This is the project that I'm currently working on, and my email and phone number. And I'm ISO Anahit. Anahit? Yeah, did I say your name?
Me.
Yes.
Yes.
Please have a question.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was really very fruitful topic and very interesting. So my main question is whether during your expertise you have come across with the processes or situation when people don't want to share their knowledge and they are not willing, and what are some measures that can be taken just to overcome this process. And this was the first one. And the second I wrote in the chat, and how to identify the experts just in the organization. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you for those questions. The first one, I think it depends if it's an isolated case or if it's a recurring problem. So if it's only one individual, which is never the case, so it depends on your team, but like, if it's a big team, it's usually not. I would go just escalating it, right? So if you can convince management that knowledge sharing is important, and as I answered Vincent earlier, usually management is able to understand the value of knowledge sharing, then you just escalate it and it goes top down. That's how I'll do it, honestly. What happened within this organization is that, as I mentioned earlier, some of this knowledge sharing activities I sort of insisting into being part of their KPIs, so they will be evaluated on this as well, how they are being sharing the knowledge. It should be part of their yearly performance review as well. I think it's extremely important. Without that, I don't think you would fight it. I don't think you should go head on head and try to fight it alone in that sense. For the second question, I think I answered, but I'm happy to repeat it again. What we did in this case was a tool that we scored where the critical knowledge was, and this was usually filled out by the supervisors or the managers, and then based on that scoring, we'll rank people on this person, for example, has critical knowledge, and this is the first round that will get. They would have to fill out a template, which we also created, into sharing that tacit knowledge and making some sort of documentation out of their tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge, which was then shared in the CMC wiki or the knowledge management framework, whatever you are using at the time.
Okay.
I would have to find it, but I'm happy to share it with you if I can find it, the tool itself, so reach out to me and I will happily share it.
We're doing the process of succession planning process just to identify experts and involve them in succession planning processes in our
Are you allocating
organization.
resources and time to this? Because this is also extremely time consuming. It's not something
Yes.
that is done, okay. Because sometimes I think management thinks that this happens like overnight and let's just pick a few people and then let's get that done, So it's very important to budget it in for the year and allocate time and resources and capabilities within the teams to do that.
Yes, and also to identify what is critical knowledge for this or that organization, and then it will be easier. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We had a question from Carl. Carl, do you want to ask directly the question? Carl, are you still with us? Maybe not. Abby, you had some question also. Do you want to ask directly the questions?
Okay, I will do. Dr. Bebeka, I had two questions. I think I want to ask, you might have heard about Bill Gates saying that within a few years, 4, 5, 6 years, for majority of the ailments, we would not need to go to a doctor for curing it. And he was talking about AI's capacity to get consulted for them. What are your observations about like how the law in different countries or maybe some continents and the AI tech and of course the pharma industry are working on this or resisting this, or what are they doing? Do you have any observation? This is probably not exactly related to what you showed us right now, but I still thought I should ask you.
Okay, yeah, this is not necessarily knowledge management related, but I think that what you're referring to is this digital twin. So different AIs or different digital health tools, I'll call it, could replace if they have information, or you can fill out different apps and ask if you have chronic disease and so on. As for all of this AI related in any sector, I have a lot of reservation. I don't think that the governments or the systems are ready to implement all these changes. And honestly, maybe this is a little bit biased because I'm one of those. I wouldn't want to be replaced by AI, but honestly, I'm not concerned. I've seen the work that AI does at my level, and Sometimes I wish they can replace me, but it's not doable. I think that there will be a lot of support for medical doctors and healthcare systems. I don't think that it will be in the next 5 years.
Okay, okay. And maybe your answer tends me to ask you one more
Yeah.
question. That just maybe a month back, you being from America originally, like a month back, Trump told the pharma companies, r- I mean, price your medicines more equitably for certain geographies. Now, I do not know about whether the pharma companies did it or whatever, but
I
what
wouldn't like
might
to
happen?
comment on anything Trump, I don't even think that Trump's spokesperson can comment on that. So I wouldn't
Okay,
get involved into that, but I
okay.
would say that there will be, like, there is a lot of uncertainty in a lot of sectors, and then also healthcare and pharma is one of those. And this year there will be it will be the fifth year that I attend the World Economic Forum in Davos in January, and
Mhm,
I think that this will be one of the major themes. Last year was AI. This year will be like the age of insecurities, and I think a little bit of unpredictability. I think that's a big word.
mhm.
We don't know
Okay,
which. Yeah.
okay, okay, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Monica, you had a question also? You want to ask it directly?
Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me?
Ah,
It's
oh, Carl is
Carl.
back. Okay, Carl, please go ahead.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I unmuted myself and I muted myself again. So I was talking, but you couldn't hear me. So yeah. So my area of focus is mega projects, and the challenge that we have at this particular moment in time is PIF. That's the investment fund, is significantly cutting back on resource, and there are thousands of people leaving with lots of tacit knowledge. My question is, were you able to put a cost of some form against the tacit knowledge as an investment that you could actually use as a business case in any way, shape, or form that would substantiate codifying that tacit knowledge?
So if I understand correctly, is how much it was costing losing the tacit knowledge? Was I able to predict?
Yes.
Right. So obviously it was an estimation, but I did work with a statistician to prepare a presentation, let's say, for upper management to actually get funding, and more than funding, support, like sponsorship within the organization, to allocate time and resources also for the current employees that were working there, such as the managers and so on, to implement the tools, like to locate where the tacit knowledge is located and so on. This requires times from their daily work. It requires time to analyze it later on and so on. So there is a way you can do it. Obviously, it's an estimation, and I'll be very honest, considering the major changes and the economic insecurities currently, this will be very hard to implement or sell to upper management nowadays. From what I've seen, if there is nothing existing in the current in the organization currently, just to start from scratch would be extremely hard to buy it.
So was it purely on a cost basis? So did you actually use the cost to codify the tacit knowledge, but then on the other side of the coin, look at what the cost would be of not codifying? What the risk was, what would actually be lost, and it would be irrevocable. Once people are gone, they're gone, and you're not going to be able to get that knowledge back. Is there any way that you could potentially create an enhanced value around that?
So there is a lot of resistance to say that we have done, we'll find a way to function in the same way that we have functioned so far and so on. Like we have always done it this way, this phrase that I used earlier. So there is a lot of resistance. What I would say is that there is a financial aspect, but there is also the regulatory aspect of things, at least in pharma and healthcare. So your reputation, it's extremely important. I apologize.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I've got
You
lots
to
and lots of other questions.
if you have a major, let's say, I'll give a concrete example. Let's say if one batch has a major problem and this was done, and this happened because of some sort of knowledge loss, that would have, yeah, that will have an impact in years to come. It's not a one-time thing. That's what I was trying to say.
Thank you. We still have, do you still have a few minutes? There was still 2 more questions, maybe, or you can answer them very rapidly. Is it okay for you, Bebeka, or you?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so let me read the first question. So if you were to design and build a knowledge management framework for an organization today, what would you change or rethink when integrating generative AI tools? How would you reshape the assumption, processes, or priorities compared to how KM systems were originally conceived? So more or less, now the generative AI tools are available, would you do things differently, or would you reuse the same approach?
Well, I think the search function that I mentioned earlier would be much easier now than it was before these tools. For everything else within pharma, at least, it's so highly regulated that I'll be very reluctant to share in AI generated tools, you know.
And last
Because
question,
also to breach of data, and it's extremely regulated. So I wouldn't, not all innovation is good innovation in all sectors, let's say.
Yeah. And last question that will, that's something we discussed before the beginning, but that ends up also at the end. Can you identify any characteristic or challenges that are specific to pharma or health industries that require specific KM tactics or approaches? Anything that makes KM different in your industry?
So regulation, ethics, first of all, regulation, it's extremely hard to get new tools into. You have to justify everything, ask for permission. One of the reasons that I couldn't share today a lot of the tools, it's because there is so much regulation around here, you know, like and rightfully so, otherwise it wouldn't be possible to operate in the scenes, right? So I think this is exactly what sets pharma and healthcare apart. There are a few other sectors like this, like nuclear. I would think of something that I highly regulated. Also, aerospace, it's also highly regulated, stuff like that.
So it's already very difficult in general to implement knowledge management. But in addition to your case, you have additional constraints that you need to deal with that add additional barriers to the natural flow of knowledge.
Well, and something I want to mention is that also getting buy-in, I think in any and every sector, is that knowledge management for forever, I think, it's seen as fluff. So whenever there is a budget cut, whatever is going on, this is one of the projects that it's usually optional in many sectors, in many organizations. And this is a setback, a constant setback, I think, for all of us that work with knowledge management.
Well, I think it's a nice conclusion. Thank you so much, Bebeka, for your great presentation and
you.
sharing with us your challenges and your successes too. And congratulations for all of this. And thank you all again for being with us today. Keep get in touch with Bebeka if you want
please
to
do.
connect. Yes. And for us, so we will. I will send again in a few weeks the agenda for next year. Thank you for some of you who sent me some private message to volunteer for next year. I will for sure contact you, and have a nice holiday season. We are not here yet, but it's approaching closely. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Bebeka.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you.